thank you, and thank you for inviting me along to join you in your week of speaker events. But just to develop that introduction, I have always been an engineer and a scientist, even from the earliest days. It's quite a sad story, but when I was young, all I could think about was planes, trains, and automobiles, and I was completely obsessed with it. And I always knew from a very young age what I was going to do. When I remember going through school, and all of my friends thinking, what would we do? I've got no idea. I knew exactly what it was I was going to do, and that was to go on and study engineering, and that's exactly what I did do. I went to Clyde University and I did mechanical engineering, and then I came out of that. And as you heard, I went to the Clyde submarine base, and I worked with the Royal Navy, not for the Royal Navy or not as part of the Royal Navy, but with them as a civilian consultant, which was the best fun ever, because it meant you got all of the benefits of being in the Navy without any of the, having to stick to any of the formality. And you got to play around the submarines, which was great. For a 22-year-old guy, going out onto the west coast of Scotland and being taken out by a tug and then thrown over onto a submarine at dawn was just the most exciting thing you could imagine. And then, of course, you'd come back to Helensburgh and you'd go out with all the rates on a Sunday night or a Thursday night, which was just as exciting and just as dangerous. I can tell you that. But then I did that for a couple of years, and then I was tempted back to the university. I always fancied doing a bit of a PhD. I always wanted to find out how smart I was. The truth wasn't that smart, and I did my PhD. This time it was aircraft flight control systems. So I went from one big boy's toy to another, and this time working with a British Aerospace. And I worked on the design of the flight control system for the Typhoon, the fighter aircraft that's in service just now with the RAF. So again, fantastic fun, and that was me indulging all of my passions. I then got married, and I thought I need to earn a decent living. So I left the university and became a software engineer for 6 years. And again, had the best time travelling the world this time, working with banks, telcos, utility companies, and just, having fun, going into big organisations and working with them to develop and fix mission-critical software systems. So it's always been about technology with me, but then I started to move more and more into sort of management and commercial positions, and I found myself as chief exec of a startup company that came out of Strathclyde University. And then I did something a wee bit strange. I went down to London to run a company which was all about education. And that was a really, really strange thing to do. All of this experience to date had been about engineering, science, and suddenly I'm asked to go down to London and run this company which was all about education. And the truth was, I hadn't thought about education since leaving school. And I think that's probably true of most of us until you have kids, and then you start thinking about education. You start wanting the very best for your kids, and you start to look at the education system a wee bit more critically. So probably because of that, and the other reason was that the chairman down there was Lord David Putnam, the film producer who did Chariots of Fire and The Mission and The Killing Fields, and he sort of persuaded me that it was the right thing to do. It didn't feel right, and I turned the job down 4 times before finally accepting it, but I went down there and I did it. And I found, I was taken into a completely new world of education. Coming from the commercial world where it's all about money and making money, to this new world where it's all about doing the very best for kids, and money is just something you need to do the job. And it did change me. I think I was very quickly won over by the dedication and the mission that that drives most teachers. And I said before that every parent wants the very best for their kids, I really believe that's true for teachers as well. They want the very best for the kids under their care. So we worked with schools and teachers and kids to try and improve that learning experience using technology. And it was a bit of a strange thing for me to do. I did feel like a fish out of water, but I loved it. But then I looked at my CV and I think, that does not make sense. All of this technology and then suddenly 4 years in education. But then the Science Centre job came up and then it made perfect sense for me. Because fundamentally the Science Centre is about education. It's an educational resource. And I've got a question for you. Who has been into the Science Centre? How many of you have you got kids? So okay. So there's quite a, I don't usually get that. It's usually the people that put their hands up are all of the people that have been to the Science Centre and the ones that have kids. And that's the introduction for most people. When they have kids, they learn about the Science Centre and they go there if you haven't been there for a corporate event. And that was definitely the case for me. When I had kids, or when myself and my now ex-wife had kids, our friends who were a couple of years ahead of us would say, take the kids to the Science Centre, you've got to go there. And that was my first introduction to the Science Centre. I took the kids there, and so I was a customer of the Science Centre long before I was an employee. And I still think that is the way that most people today get introduced to the Science Centre, but that's something I want to change and evolve, and I'll talk about that in a wee bit more detail later. But first of all, facts and figures about Glasgow Science Centre. 3 buildings. We've got the Science Mall itself, which is the largest science centre in the UK, 4,500 square metres of exhibition space. We've got the IMAX theatre, and we've got the tower, the Glasgow Tower, which was for many years the bane of my life. I joined the Science Centre just under 3 years ago, and pretty quickly I realised that I wasn't going to be able to achieve anything unless I got that thing sorted. Because every taxi I went into, it was all they spoke about. And in fact, this morning, funnily enough, I got a taxi from the Science Centre. First thing the guy said to me, he said, "What about that tower?" I said, "What about it?" He said, "Does it work?" I said, "Aye, it works." End of story. But we had to get past that. So when I joined, there was a lot that we had to fix. We had to fix the tower. We had to sort out the IMAX. The IMAX is the biggest cinema screen in Scotland, and it's only a metre smaller than the biggest screen in the UK, which is down in Waterloo, at the BFI. But we had an old print projection system in there, which meant we had very limited access to movies. There was only 1 or 2 films being released on print a year. And then when the films did come out, we had to pay a £60,000 minimum guarantee in the films. So more often than not, we were losing money on films, and we could only show a couple a year. So it was bleeding cash for us. So the very first thing I did when I got to the Science Centre was pick up the phone to Odeon and Cineworld and say, are you interested in this? And then that kick-started a tender process which resulted in Cineworld being the successful bidder on the process, and now they lease the cinema from us. And they invested over £1 million in the building. They put a new digital projection system in, which means they have access to every movie that's released. And we retain its use as an educational facility. So when we get school kids in, we can show educational films. And they've refurbished the whole area, and at the end of this year they're putting in a laser projection system, a laser IMAX system, which will be the second system in the UK, and that will really take cinema going to the next level. So I firmly believe, and anybody that's been there, is that is now the very best cinema in Scotland. It's the best cinema experience, completely immersive, and it doesn't have to be 3D, because it is a 3D experience, because the screen is so big, the sound system is so dynamic, that you really do feel you're in the heart of the movie. So the first phase of the Science Centre was all about fixing things. And then we started to look at the exhibition stock, because the Science Centre was opened in 2001 and it really hadn't gone through any major refresh since then. So the exhibition stock that went in new in 2001 was still sitting there when I arrived. And in 2012 we did our first major refresh. That's on floor 3, and that's Bodyworks. And that really set the standard for us in terms of what we wanted to achieve with the rest of the Science Centre. And it's been a tremendously successful exhibition. We seem to have got the balance right between something that appeals to children and keeps children engaged, and something that appeals to adults. So adults can go there and you really can spend hours there learning all about the human body and how we work. And it also has been, the stimulus to 2 record years of visitor numbers. So here are the sort of figures, the important figures, the numbers of visitors we get in. Last year was our very best year ever. So 305,000 public visitors into the Science Centre. And then on top of that, we had 77,000 education visitors. So those are kids that come in with their schools, their classes, their teachers, and they have a very structured day where they'll do a couple of workshops, they'll have a bit of a run around, they may see a planetarium show, and they may see or an IMAX movie. And then on top of that, we've got an outreach arm. It's 2 transit vans and 2 teams of people that take a sort of mini science centre around the country. And again, last year was a record year in terms of numbers of engaged in that, and that was over 100,000 people we engaged with. And that was kids in schools from John O'Groats to Stranraer. We visited communities on Isla, all over the country. We visited science festivals all over the country. We've been in shopping centres. We've been in prisons, which is very popular. Maybe it's just because it's a change of scenery, some new faces. But that's how we take the Science Centre out to the rest of the country. And it's been so successful that we cannot keep up with demand. So we were in Northern Ireland a couple of weeks ago. We're going down to London in a few weeks' time. And this whole programme has been sponsored by GlaxoSmithKline. And they have asked us to, this current phase is coming to an end this year, and they've asked us to put forward a proposal that will enable us to take it out to the whole of the UK. So to cover England and Wales as well as Scotland. So that's incredibly exciting. So with all of that, what is it we actually do at the Science Centre? Well, we sell an experience. We're not a free day out, we're definitely not a cheap day out. People choose to spend their time and their money with us. And what we offer them is an experience, which is fun, interactive, exciting, we hope. And on top of that, there's a chance that you might learn something. But that's what we sell. It's an experience in the same way that Disney or Legoland sell an experience. And we've got to work very hard to maintain that experience, to continue to convince people that, to spend their time and money with us, especially when there are so many other things they can do with their time and money. And, we always distinguish ourselves from a museum. You come to the Science Centre to do things, you don't come to see things. And I would say that's a very distinct difference between the Science Centre and a museum. A museum, it's all about curated objects. You go in and you see things and you read about things. You come into the Science Centre and the first thing you do is you interact with the exhibits. And then once you've got that initial engagement, you can read a wee bit about what you're doing and maybe try and understand some of the physics and the science behind it. And that's the order of things. Unless we can get you engaged, there's no opportunity for learning beyond that. And through that experience, So through that fun, exciting, engaging experience, we sell science. And it's as fundamental as that. That is our product. We sell science. And the reason we do it, there's really three reasons. And I'll go into all of these in a bit more detail. One, to develop the scientific literacy of the general population. Two is to encourage children to think about science and engineering as a career. So to encourage the next generation of scientists and engineers. And three, and no less important than the first two, is to create a culture of science. For science to be as something to be enjoyed in the same way as you enjoy music or art. Why can't you enjoy science in the same way? So those are the sort of three driving objectives of why we do what we do. But going into them in a bit more detail, what do we mean by scientific literacy? Well, you pick up a newspaper, and you guys will know it probably better than most, all of the news stories. You look at the news stories in a week, and I bet there's at least half a dozen that have scientific content. And some of them will be scare stories, eat this will happen to you. Or there'll be breakthrough stories, cure for cancer or cure for this and that. Or it'll be the Mars explorer, etc. And when I did, the great thing about Google and the internet, there's so much on there. So I typed in scientific literacy, and there's a lot of sort of cartoons that come up that illustrate the point, and you get the sort of funnier ones, which is it's the dilemma. How do you lose weight? What do you eat? Is chocolate good for you this month, or is it bad for you? Is red wine good for you, or is it bad for you? But it's that constant dilemma, and that's we're constantly being bombarded with new studies and new evidence. And part of our role is to try and help the general public better understand that. So that's one level of scientific literacy. Then there's another, which is a wee bit darker. And this is probably referring to GM foods. GM foods have been stopped. The development and production of GM foods have been blocked by protest groups. But it might just be the thing that enables us to feed 7 billion on the planet. And there are so many issues like this where fundamentally the science is good. Fundamentally the science has taken us forward. But there's so much public opposition, and that opposition is based on fear and ignorance rather than an informed debate. And if you look at GM foods in particular, we had a chief scientific advisor in Europe, a lovely lady called Anne Glover, Scottish lady, who was forced out of her job as a chief scientific advisor for the European Parliament because, as a scientist, she said there is no evidence to say that GM food is any worse for you than naturally produced food. And it was that opposition against GM foods that forced her out. And you can look across all different areas of science, so stem cells, so much opposition to them, and a lot of it is just knee-jerk. It's not informed by any fact. You look at the current situation with energy. What we all need, we all rely on energy, we all consume energy, and we can generate it, through traditional oil and gas, which is causing problems with the climate. Nuclear, which people are concerned about, the risks of nuclear. Renewables, nobody wants a wind turbine in their own back garden. And the latest one is shale. You see how it's transformed the energy market in the US and provided all of this cheap energy, but here it's completely blocked, again just down to public knee-jerk reaction. And we think that we've got a very, very important role to play in trying to provide people with the facts to enable them to have a more rationed, reasonable, informed debate about the pros and cons of current science. But this is probably the best definition of scientific literacy. This is what we mean. We want people to have an open mind, and we want them also to be skeptics as well. So not to believe everything that you read in the press, but to try and critically analyse these stories, and if we can provide them with the sort of tools to do that, then we've achieved one of our goals. The next big motivation for us is the next generation of scientists and engineers, and an awful lot of it is linked to economic development. So I'm sure we all agree that, in order to continue to grow economically as a country, we need to continue to innovate, to produce, to invent, and that's going to take our next generation of scientists and engineers coming through to drive that economic growth. And there's no shortage of facts and figures out there about current shortages or business surveys about this increasingly critical situation, which is called the skills agenda, and everybody is talking about it just now. And this is a very recent report by the CBI talking about tomorrow's world, and from one side looking at the demands from business for young engineers and scientists to come through, and also looking at the provision within schools and how inadequate a lot of teachers even feel the science provision in schools is. And to provide some anecdotal evidence, that energy industry, for instance, one of the big Scottish utilities, 80% of their workforce will reach retirement age within the next 10 years. Now, so we're not talking about engineers to advance things, we're talking about the numbers of engineers and scientists we need just to maintain the current state. So just to keep the lights on, we are going to need very many more, tens of thousands of more engineers and scientists coming through than we've currently got. And that's a critical situation, and it's getting worse. So you can look at the statistics, and the statistics are quite compelling. But if if you were a primary school kid sitting in front of me, would that excite you? If I told you, industry needs 33% more engineers or scientists, is that going to motivate you to study physics and go and get an engineering degree? Probably not. And I think maybe a better way to do it is actually look at some of the grand challenges we face, as a civilization. Look at climate change. How you look at drought in California, for instance. Look at how do we feed 7 billion people? How do we deal with all of these grand challenges? Some of them we've created as a result of technology. Others are just there. But again, we're looking to science and technology to solve some of these problems. And I think that's a much better way of motivating kids. And then finally, there's the whole wonder of science. Who doesn't get excited about science and engineering? I said, maybe I'm a bit of a geek. Self-confessed, but I do get excited about it. And I dare anybody not to get excited about science, if it's presented in the right way. And here's our 3 examples. These are the pictures from Hubble telescope. Those are the pillars of creation in the Eagle Nebula. And what you're looking at there is the creation of stars, 7,000 light years away. Now, I can't imagine what 7,000 light years means, but it's almost, we've got instrumentation technology now that is looking at the beginning of time, and even just look at the beauty of that. It is something to wonder at. It is something to enjoy as we discover more and more about the origins of our universe, how things work, how we work. I think that's quite exciting. And then, other advances that have really caught my interest, exoskeletons and robotics. This is Iron Man stuff coming to life. And a lot of this has been developed by the military. So how do you create the super soldier? But some of this exoskeleton stuff, it's been used by Korean ship workers to enable them to lift big heavy loads. They strap on these suits. It's enabling paralysed people to walk again. It's incredible technology, and it's getting better and better. And the rate of advance is accelerating. It's coming quicker and quicker. And then this last graphic, it's not very self-explanatory, but that's the logo for IBM Watson. And IBM Watson is this big supercomputer that IBM put together. And you've heard of Big Blue, and Big Blue was IBM's first big supercomputer that beat some of the grand champions of chess. And that was clever, but it's maybe not that clever if you think chess is all about patterns, and computers can learn a lot of patterns, and very, very quickly they can run through different scenarios and permutations. So beating somebody at chess it's smart, but it's not that smart. What IBM Watson has done is beaten humans in quiz programs, and not just programs like Who Was the Queen of England in 1680. They challenged, IBM Watson challenged human players in a game called Jeopardy. And Jeopardy is a big American quiz show, and it's very cryptic. It's like solving a crossword puzzle. You get clues. It's not a direct question fact. And IBM Watson was so clever that it beat all of these human champions, hands down, in a matter of days. It learned how to do it. And all of this technology has now been applied to areas that we thought were untouchable by computers. So medicine, law, journalism. So a lot of Reuters now generate all of their financial reports using computers. They're all automatically generated. And you wouldn't be able to tell the difference. It sounds, they just sound as if a human has put them down. So the comparative advantage of humans over computers is narrowing and narrowing all the time as these new machines create all of these human-like characteristics and increased cognitive function. And I think that's really, really exciting, but it's going to challenge us to rethink education and the whole world of work going forward. So that's why we do what we do. Scientific literacy, next generation, and science is culture, science is fun. And the way we do it is probably 4 elements to it. One, there's the interactive exhibits. So we try and create the most exciting science experience by getting people to come in and do things. We've got our staff, trained science communicators. And for me, what I want them to do is really get people excited, get them curious, get them stimulated. So I always say to them, I don't really care what people learn or don't learn when they're with us. What I do care is how we make them feel. I want young and old to come into the Science Centre and leave it feeling a bit more curious about their world around them, a bit more stimulated to go and investigate the world around them. And if we can do that, then we've done our job well. And then, we've got the whole, we've got a great set of buildings there. There is so much more we can do with that. And one of the next stages I want to take the Science Centre is really start to dress the building. So right now, if you go into the atrium, you don't really know where you are. It's a bit of an empty hall. What I would like to see is, something like the Science Museum in London, where you walk in and you see science all around you as soon as you cross over the door. And for your heart rate to start going up and the excitement levels just to start to increase just as soon as you walk through the doors. But that's for next year. And then, the other key element, and this is what that most people don't realise, it's the people that we bring into the science centres. So the experts from industry, from academia, who will come in and talk about what they do. So passionate scientists, passionate engineers, astronauts. We had the singing astronaut in just before Christmas, Chris Hadfield. He came in, filled the IMAX theatre, and what an event. Just an incredible experience. And again, I challenge anyone not to be excited about that. And that's another way that we create that excitement, that inspiration, and transmit the passion for science and engineering by getting passionate science and engineers in to come and work with us. So that's how we do it. Now the challenge, how do we do it better? This is the business model, really. So we're a charity. And as you saw in the first diagram, although I didn't go into it, our income breakdown, we're going to turn over about 7 million this year. We got a government grant of about 900,000 this year. So for every pound that the Scottish Government give us, we've got to earn 6. We've got to generate our own income. And we do that through admissions, through corporate events. We do it with a car parking income from Cineworld. We work really, really hard to balance the books. So we run the Science Centre like a business. But the challenge is how do we generate sufficient surplus to allow us to continue to improve that experience, to allow us to continue to invest in the exhibits, to put in new exhibits and dress the building and really realise the potential that I think the Science Centre has. That's our challenge. And we operate very well, very efficiently as a business. We'll turn over 7 million this year and we'll generate a 6-figure surplus. So we're doing well, but it doesn't even scratch the surface of what we would need to generate to really refresh offers. And to give you an example, Bodyworks costs 1.9 million to develop. The big exhibition for this year is going to cost us 1.5 million. So I've got to look at other areas. Where else can I get that money? And the traditional route is the sort of trusts and foundations. We're a charity. So one way to do it is to go out and say, we're doing something good. Support us to do this and support us to do more good things. And if I'm honest and quite critical, that's the way that most science centres operate just now. And it's a pretty tough gig because there's not that much cash around. There aren't that many big charities that support science communication. And it takes you a long time to get the money out of them. And once you've got the money out of them, it's a long time before you can go back to them. So it's hard work, but it's possible. But for me, there's a much easier route. We have a product and we have a value proposition, and it's all about selling science. And I've explained the reasons that we sell science. But there's a whole group of other organisations out there that are also selling science. So governments and government agencies are selling science. And they're trying to encourage positive behavioural change based on what we now know. And examples of that of what we now know about how to lead a healthier life, or what we now know how to be a wee bit more sustainable and take better care of the scarce resources we have as a planet. And also the skills agenda is critical to government. They are pushing the skills agenda. If we look at corporates, the number one thing in their list is skills. And it's all they can think about just now, skills, skills, skills. And they're all investing in public engagement and of what they do and trying to connect with schools. And there's also the whole public perception thing. They need a mandate to operate. So if you're a turbine producer and you want to put a turbine up, you've got to overcome the public objection first. You've got to convince the general public that it's an essential part of the energy mix. And as I said, that applies to stem cells, GM foods, etc. So there's a massive communication exercise that they have to go through just in order to sell what they do. And then you've got your learner societies, Royal Academy of Engineering, Institute of Physics, Institute of Chemistry, Institute of Biology. All of these organisations, they sell professional journals, they generate revenues from that, and they use some of these revenues to promote science to kids, to try and get more kids into their own particular subject areas. And then you've got academia. So as a condition of receiving research money now, there are very, very stringent conditions being put on academics to engage with the public, to do large-scale public engagement exercises to explain the relevance of their research and why they're doing it. So all of these organisations are selling science. It's a non-core function for most of them, but it's a pretty essential function. And they're all allocating budgets for it. Selling science is our bread and butter. That is our core function. And we can create a value proposition that consists of audience, interface to schools, interface to general public, trained science communicators, and also, and very importantly, a brand which is trusted, credible, independent. And that's the value proposition that I've got to try and develop and sell on to these guys and convince them that by working through us, they're going to achieve so much more impact than putting their money into individual and disparate initiatives. And that is working very, very well for us. So again, as an example, with Bodyworks, it took 6 years to raise the money, the 1.9 million for Bodyworks, going down the charities route. With Powering the Future, which is coming this year, and that's all about the energy industry, it took me less than 2 years to raise 1.5 million because I went out with a value proposition. I'm creating a business imperative for organisations that will justify long-term investment in the Science Centre. And the challenge for me then is to move away from this image of a kid's ball pool, which we want to retain part of that. We're always going to be a fun day out for the kids. We're always going to be a great day, a great place to take the family. But we've got to extend that and also be seen as a very, very serious partner for business, for government, for academia, and experts in science communication and public engagement. And that's making very deliberate efforts at extending and developing that profile in order to attract the resources into the Science Centre that I need to develop the experience. And by developing the experience, I can develop the value proposition and create this virtuous cycle of continuous improvement. And so far, so good. So I spoke about Bodyworks on tour, 7 years of investment from GSK. GSK have invested 1.6 million in us over the last 7 years. I'm hoping they'll continue that going forward, and we're getting every encouragement that that's exactly the case. Powering the Future, it's the energy industry that's funding this. So Scottish Power's, SSE's, EDF Energy, oil and gas, they're all coming to us because they need engineers. And we're going to work together to make the energy industry as attractive as we possibly can to young people, to attract in that young talent. But we also need to create a platform where we can engage in a sensible discussion with the general public about energy, to get away from this knee-jerk reaction and this, nothing's good. Well, we've all got to wake up and smell the coffee. We're all consumers, massive consumers of energy. And that demand for energy is increasing. So we've got to live with that energy mix, which includes, nuclear, renewables, oil and gas, and shale. And we're working with the industry to create that platform to engage with the public on that sensible dialogue. And the industry are funding this exhibition. We're working hard to develop the content, the design, the narrative, and we'll be launching it at the end of the year. And that'll be there for at least 6 years. We're also working with Skills Development Scotland to create an area which is all about doing science and getting kids in to sort of get back to basics, to put soldering irons in their hands and to get them building electronic circuits, to get them building robots, to get them programming computers. And again, it's the skills agenda. And Skills Development Scotland are tasked by the Scottish Government to really create the next generation of workers. SDS are working with us because they realise that SDS aren't particularly exciting, they're not particularly sexy. And I'm not suggesting that we are, but we're perhaps a wee bit more exciting, and we can create a much more exciting environment to get kids in and really get them engaged in doing stuff. So we're creating this whole new area on floor 2, which will be 3 workshops, 2 ground floor workshops, a mezzanine level workshop, where kids and adults will be able to go in and make things. And we'll open it up to the general public. You'll be able to have access to 3D printers, CNC machines, and just make stuff. And then, you probably won't have heard about this, but this is probably one of the most exciting things that we are doing just now. And these photos are so recent. They were taken yesterday. This is the new Southern General Hospital. So these are the waiting areas for children's accident and emergency imaging and diagnostics. And for those of you with kids, you've probably been to York Hill at least once or twice with broken noses or arms or cuts and grazes, and they are terrible places to hang around in, because you've usually got sick, distressed kids. You usually have to bring along their healthy siblings. Everybody is bored out of their skull, uncomfortable, stressed. So we have worked with the NHS to create this environment which really takes the stress out of everyone. You know, nice, relaxed things to do. This is a teddy bear hospital for the younger kids. We've got exhibits and displays here to engage older kids and adults. And it is just the most incredible thing. And I take no credit for it. You know, it's our team that has delivered this. But that's another element of the Science Centre business model. This is a 1.3 million project for us, and we were contracted by the NHS to deliver this for them. So that's another aspect of our business. So I'll probably just leave it there, just for a final word on education. Our world is changing. And as I've already explained, we need so many more kids to develop really high level skills in science and engineering. Not only for our sake, but for their sake. Because more and more technology is starting to, as I said, the gap between human advantage and technical advantage is narrowing. And in the same way that technology has always replaced manual labour, it's starting to replace cognitive labour now. So nobody's job is safe anymore. So that's forcing us to really rethink education and careers. And I go back to this guy, John Dewey, who was a bit of a anarchist and revolutionary in his time. And what he said, back in the 1940s is we've really got to get back to experiential learning. So it's called, the academic term is constructionist theory, which is all about getting kids to do things, learn by doing and through experience. And I think that's what we're trying to do at the Science Centre. We're trying to put the fun back into education. We're trying to convince young people and older people that the world is a really, really interesting place, and encourage them to go out there and explore and discover and start to create for themselves, because that's what they're going to need to do, not only to help us with some of the grand challenges, but also to enable them to live, long, productive careers. So that's it. Thank you.